Alright guys, we're in Deuteronomy chapter 5 today, and the first 21 verses really is recounting, well, the whole chapter rather, is recounting stuff that occurred at the mount where God had given them the Ten Commandments. And the first 21 chapters, 21 verses rather, he's kind of recounting the Ten Commandments, and for the first like 4 or 5 commandments he gives a little bit more detail than he did back in Exodus, at least from what I remember. Maybe he explains it from a different perspective, but also just restates the commandments and so on and so forth. So, but in verse 23, Moses is recounting a conversation that took place between him and the Israelites when the Israelites had, when God had appeared over the mount in a pillar of fire and had spoken to all the people, not just to Moses. And he says, "And it came to pass, when ye heard the voice out of the midst of the darkness, for the mountain did burn with fire, that ye came near unto me, even all the heads of your tribes and your elders. And ye said, Behold, the Lord our God hath showed us his glory and his greatness. We have heard the voice out of the midst of the fire. We have seen this day that God doth talk with man, and he liveth." So they begin to recognize here that God has a relationship with them, that God speaks to mankind. And this is something that is kind of profound, because think about that for a second. The all-powerful, the infinite God who spoke creation into existence, and he comes down and he has a conversation with these people. And just kind of somewhat humbling when you think about it for a second. So in verse 25 he says, "Now therefore why should we die? For this great fire will consume us if we hear the voice of the Lord our God any more, then we shall die." So notice the response of them. They instantly see their own imperfections and impurity and begin to fear because of God's power, because of God's holiness. The voice of God is something that they feel like is going to kill them if they hear his voice anymore. So verse 26, "For who is there of all flesh that hath heard the voice of the living God speaking out of the midst of the fire, as we have and lived?" So they instantly recognize here that this is a unique thing, that this has not occurred to anybody else. God spoke to them directly, to the people, and they recognized their own uniqueness, the fact that God had called them out and had set up this special relationship with them. And then this was their response to all that in verse 27. "Go thou near and hear all that the Lord our God shall say, and speak thou unto us all that the Lord our God shall speak unto thee, and we will hear it and do it." So notice that here it is, they had an opportunity to speak with God directly, to come before him and to have this relationship with God, but they wanted to only do so through a mediator. This kind of stands out to me, that they had the opportunity to have a relationship with God, but they chose for Moses to be the mediator. Moses didn't implant himself into that situation and do that and kind of take charge. The people actually chose that they would rather deal with God through Moses than to deal with God directly. And that's it's kind of, I don't know, somewhat ironic, because Jesus went to the cross and died so that we could come before the throne of grace, as it says in the book of Hebrews, so that we could have that relationship again with God directly, and not have to go through the mediator, or rather we go through the mediator, Christ. So then we go through the rest of the chapter, and he continues talking about it, and in verse 30, Moses tells the people, "Go say to them," or God is telling Moses to tell them, "Go say to them, Get you into your tents again. But as for thee, stand now here by me, and I will speak unto thee all the commandments and statutes and the judgments which thou shalt teach them, that they may do them in the land which I give them to possess it. So he tells them, all right, that's fine. The people are afraid, so I will speak to you directly. That's fine. And you just repeat what it is that I say, and tell them to kind of go on. So in verse 33, he closes the chapter out with this: Ye shall walk in all the ways which the Lord your God hath commanded you, that ye may live, and that it may be well with you, and that ye may prolong your days in the land which ye shall possess. And this is actually re-quoting something that was actually in the previous chapter as well, and also re-quoting something that was in the book of Exodus. Notice here that the commandments were never set up as a basis for salvation, because we see in numerous cases where they didn't keep the commandments, that God continued to stay with them. They suffered punishment for it, but that the commandments, the basis for the commandments, were not ever about salvation. The basis for the commandments were about their standing here on earth. They would live long, they would do well, meaning that they would live in peace, they would live in health, and things like this. But it had nothing to do with their relationship with God. The one thing that had to do with their relationship with God was their faith in Him. It was that in the Old Testament, it's that now. So, and now we exercise our faith in Him through the mediator still in place, which is Christ Jesus, and our faith is in Him. So, anyway, something that stood out I wanted to share. God bless.